The gray sedan stopped in front of a familiar two-story house on Franklin Street. I turned off the engine and sat still for a few seconds, staring at the structure that had belonged to me 3 months ago. The brickwork painted a warm beige color, the neat front garden with the rose bushes I'd planted 20 years ago, the wide porch with white columns. It looked exactly as it had on the day I'd signed the deed of transfer. Only now I was a guest. The fall wind rustled the yellow leaves of the maple tree that grew just outside the fence. I remembered planting that tree as a small sapling when Jessica was still 15. She'd helped me dig the hole then, holding the tree while I covered the roots with soil. Now the maple grew taller than the roof of the house, its spreading crown giving shade to half the lot. Time was flying faster than I wanted to admit. I adjusted the collar of my blue shirt and got out of the car. 72 years didn't make me look decrepit. My back was still straight, my gait confident, and my gray hair neatly trimmed. I grabbed a small travel bag from the back seat and headed for the front door. I didn't have my keys anymore. It was a strange feeling, walking up to your own house and realizing that you could only enter with permission. On the way to the porch, I noticed a few changes. Jessica had replaced the old streetlights at the entrance with modern LED ones. The flower bed on the left side had been dug up and planted with some ornamental shrubs I didn't recognize. But the garage was in need of a paint job. The paint on the gate was peeling, and the metal was starting to rust in places. That wouldn't have happened in my lifetime. I pressed the bell, and it sounded long. A few seconds later, the door opened. Jessica Carter Blake stood on the doorstep in a homemade gray robe, her hair gathered into a careless bun. At 45, she was still attractive, but the wrinkles around her eyes and tight lips betrayed her constant dissatisfaction with life. I couldn't help thinking that she looked more and more like her mother at the age when our marriage had begun to fray. "Daddy," she said without much enthusiasm, "I wasn't expecting you so early." "The driveway was freer than I thought," I replied, stepping into the hallway. "I hope I didn't interfere with your plans." Jessica closed the door and turned to me. There was a strained look in her eyes, as if she'd rehearsed this meeting in her mind and wasn't entirely happy with her own performance. I noticed that she had lost weight since the last time I'd seen her. Her robe hung baggy and her cheekbones were sharper. "Of course not. Come into the living room. David is watching the news." I walked through the familiar hallway into the spacious living room. Here the changes were more noticeable. The furniture was arranged almost exactly as it had been when I was there. But some of my things were gone. The antique clock from the mantel that I'd inherited from my father, the collection of Civil War books, the silver-framed photographs. In their place were modern knickknacks, glass vases of unknown purpose, glossy interior design magazines, artificial flowers in brightly colored pots. The walls had been repainted from warm cream to cool gray. The carpet, which I had chosen together with my late wife, had been replaced by a geometric rug with an abstract pattern. Even the curtains had been replaced with light white drapes that held out little light. David Blake sat in a leather armchair in front of a large television, never taking his eyes off the screen. He was a man of 48, with a balding top and a prominent belly, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt with the logo of some brewery. When he heard the footsteps, he turned his head and nodded without getting up. "Hey, Russell, how you doing? How was your trip?" "Fine, thanks," I replied, setting my bag down by the couch. Friday night traffic wasn't as heavy as usual. "Yeah, everyone's already gone for the weekend," David agreed, staring at the TV again, where they were showing a story about rising gasoline prices. On the coffee table in front of him was an open can of beer and crumbs from chips. I remembered how my wife always scolded me if I ate in the living room. "The kitchen is for eating, the living room is for relaxing," she used to say. Now the rules had changed. Jessica walked to the window and adjusted the curtains, though they hung perfectly straight. Her movements were abrupt, nervous. She glanced at me every now and then, as if she expected some unpleasant question or remark. "Do you want coffee?" she asked without turning around. "I'd love some." She headed for the exit, but stopped at the door. "How about some tea? Our coffee is instant, not very good." "Tea then," I agreed, though there was an expensive coffee maker in the kitchen cabinet that I'd bought 2 years ago. After she left, I was alone with my son-in-law. David had changed the channel and was now watching the weather forecast. The weatherman promised a rainy weekend and the first frost next week. The awkward silence dragged on, broken only by the anchor's voice and the noise of the refrigerator in the kitchen. "How was work?" I asked. "It's fine," David answered without taking his eyes off the screen. "There are always projects in the construction company. Now we do more private houses, but there is less commercial work. The economy is unstable, you know." I nodded. David had worked as a foreman for a medium-sized construction firm for many years, and our conversations invariably centered on the same topics: work, weather, sports. We never touched on deeper topics. My son-in-law was a simple, practical man with no special ambitions or interests outside of everyday concerns. "Do you have a lot of orders in the fall?" I continued, trying to keep the conversation going. "Enough. People want to finish repairs before winter, especially roofing work. Nobody wants to sit around with a leaky roof in the winter." David took a sip of beer and burped without covering his mouth. Then he picked up the remote and switched to the sports channel. "There's a soccer game on. Detroit's playing. Might be interesting." "Sure," I agreed, though I didn't care much for sports. Jessica came back with a tray with 2 cups of tea and a plate of store-bought cookies. She handed one cup to me, set the other on the coffee table next to her husband, removing the empty jar and sweeping the crumbs onto the floor. She sat down on the couch across from me with her legs tucked under her. "So tell me, how are things in the apartment?" she asked, taking a sip from her cup. "Getting used to it?" I'd moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in downtown Grand Rapids after the house was handed over. The place was decent, well-maintained, but cramped compared to the spacious house I'd lived in for a quarter century. It especially lacked a workshop in the basement, where I liked to mess around with wood in my spare time. "It's okay. I'm getting used to it. The neighbors are quiet, the management company works properly, but there's not enough room for all my stuff. I had to give away half of my books to the library." "It's for the best," Jessica nodded. "At your age, you don't want to accumulate too much stuff. The less stuff, the easier it is to keep things organized." I sipped my tea. It was too strong and bitter, the brew floating on the surface. Jessica was always rushing the brew, never letting it steep properly. "How's your health? Do you go to the doctor regularly?" she continued, a note of concern in her voice. "I do. My blood pressure sometimes rises, but the pills help. My knees hurt when it rains. All in all, I can't complain." "At your age, you have to take care of yourself," Jessica shook her head with a knowing look, "especially when you live alone. If something happens, there's no one to help you. The neighbors are strangers. They don't care about you." That phrase sounded weird, as if she wanted to remind me of my vulnerability, of the fact that I was alone. I looked at my daughter more closely. Jessica was avoiding my gaze, looking at the contents of her cup. "I'm coping for now," I said calmly. "If something serious happens, we can always call an ambulance." David found the pre-match channel and turned up the volume. The commentator was excitedly discussing the team's lineups and chances of winning, and his voice filled the pause in the conversation. "Keep it down," Jessica asked irritably. "We're having a conversation." "Cheery, come on, interesting point," David muttered but turned the sound down. "They've bought a new striker. Expensive, by the way. Several $1,000,000. Who cares?" Jessica snorted. "They'd better fix the roads with that money." David shrugged and stared at the screen again. There was clearly no rapport between the couple, and I could feel the tension. Jessica threw her husband a few unhappy glances every now and then, but he studiously ignored them. Jessica looked at me again. Something resembling concern flashed in her eyes, but it quickly disappeared. "What are your plans for the weekend? How long do you think you'll be gone?" "Until Sunday, if you don't mind," I answered. "I wanted to see how the house was doing, if the heating was okay. Winter's coming, and the system's old. Remember last year when the boiler was acting up?" Jessica exchanged a quick glance with her husband. David looked away from the TV and looked first at his wife, then at me. "Yes, the system is really old," he said slowly, choosing his words. "But we're figuring it out. I work in construction. I know something about communications. If something breaks, I can fix it myself or find a handyman." "Sure," I agreed. "I just wanted to make sure everything was working properly. This house means a lot to me. I've lived in it half my life." Jessica set the cup down on the table with a light clatter, a little more sharply than necessary. "Daddy, you realize this is our home now, right? We're in a position to look after it ourselves and make our own decisions about repairs. We don't need to be controlled. The tone of her voice became noticeably harsher, though she tried to maintain a semblance of politeness. I noticed this change, but I didn't react in any way, continuing to drink my tea calmly. Of course, I'm not going to interfere in your affairs, just old habits. When you've been in charge of every little thing in the house for 25 years, it's hard to switch off at once. I see, Jessica nodded, but she still sounded unhappy. We're just not comfortable being watched. We're adults who can take care of ourselves. David turned the TV up again, as if trying to drown out the tension in the conversation. A game was playing on the screen, and he ostentatiously watched it. Will you be joining us for dinner? Jessica asked, rising from the couch. If you don't mind. Of course not. I'll make something simple. We don't have a very rich table, not like we used to. The last phrase sounded slightly reproachful, as if she wanted to remind me of the change in their financial situation after I'd stopped helping the family with money. Jessica headed out of the living room. At the door, she turned around and looked at me. You can leave your things here on the couch for now. Then we'll decide where you should spend the night. The air in the room felt heavier after she left. David turned up the volume on the TV again and watched the game, occasionally commenting on the players' actions. I finished my tea and leaned back on the couch. The house felt both familiar and completely foreign. The walls, the ceilings, the layout. Everything was familiar, but the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Gone was the warmth and coziness that I had created here for years together with my wife. Now it was just a dwelling of other people who tolerated my presence out of politeness. I watched the game, not really paying attention to what was happening on the field, and thought about how quickly things had changed. 3 months ago, I was the owner of this house, and now I was sitting here like an unwanted guest who wouldn't even be offered a decent cup of coffee. Dinner passed in a strained atmosphere. Jessica cooked spaghetti with sauce from a jar and served it on the same plates I'd eaten from for 20 years. But even the familiar dishes didn't make the atmosphere homely. We were sitting at the kitchen table that had been used only for quick breakfasts, and the front dining room, with its massive oak table where all the family dinners had been held, was now boxed up and turned into a warehouse. Not bad, I said, though the pasta was overcooked and the sauce too salty. Thank you, Jessica said dryly, not looking up from her plate. David ate in silence, occasionally glancing at his cell phone, which lay next to his plate. The screen lit up every now and then with notifications, but he ignored them. The only sounds were the clatter of forks against china and the ticking of the old clock on the wall, one of the few things I had left here. So, how's work going for you, Jessica? I asked, trying to lighten the mood. She'd been working as a receptionist at a private clinic for 8 years now. It didn't pay very well, but it was stable. Normal, she answered briefly. The usual. Patients, paperwork, insurance. Is Dr. Harrison still the chief of staff? Not anymore. He retired last year. Now there's a new chief, young guy. He wants to change things up, make new rules. You could hear the irritation in her voice. Jessica never liked change, preferred things to stay the same. Did you get a raise? I continued. A little, she shrugged, but prices are going up faster, especially gasoline and groceries. And utility bills have gone up too. The last phrase sounded with a hint. I realized it was leading to the fact that it was costing them more than expected to maintain the house. Well, it's a big house, I said cautiously. It's not cheap to heat it. I know that from experience. You bet it is, Jessica snorted. The gas bills are crazy, and you never warned me about that. I thought you knew what you were getting into, I said calmly. We discussed all the cost when we were making the transfer. David finally took his eyes off his plate and looked at me. Theoretically, he said, but in practice it turned out differently. The boiler's always malfunctioning, the roof leaks, the plumbing's old. One thing after another breaks down. Everything worked fine when I was here, I said. That's because you fix things on time, Jessica said sharply. We don't have money for constant repairs. We're not pensioners with savings. Her tone became openly hostile. I put down my fork and looked at my daughter carefully. Jessica, if you're having trouble maintaining the house, you could have just said so. We could have found a solution. What kind of solution? She flared up. You said yourself you were handing the house over to us permanently, so we'll sort it out ourselves. I remembered the day 3 months ago when I had made the decision to hand over the house. Since my wife's death 2 years ago, I'd felt lonely and lost in those walls. Jessica regularly struck up conversations about how difficult it was for a young family to rent, how rent prices had risen, how they dreamed of a home of their own. David supported his wife by talking about how expensive it was for them to rent an apartment and how nice it would be to have a place where they could renovate to their liking. It seemed reasonable to me at the time to help my only daughter. Besides, the house really was too big for one person. I decided it was better to pass it on in my lifetime than to leave it as an inheritance. Jessica was so happy when I announced my decision. She hugged me, even cried with joy, told me what a wonderful father I was, how grateful she was for the gift. I remember how happy you were when I told you about the transfer, I said. Said it was the best gift you'd ever gotten. Yeah, Jessica mumbled, avoiding my gaze. I didn't realize at the time what it would entail. What was it going to be? I asked, even though I could sense the direction of the conversation. David and Jessica looked at each other. He nodded to his wife, as if giving her permission to speak frankly. You realize we're not ready to keep a house like this? Jessica said slowly. We have average salaries, loans, expenses, and a house requires constant investment. It's like a hole you just keep pouring money into. I lived in that house for 25 years and managed, I reminded her. You had a different salary, she flared up. You were an engineer. You made good money. What do we have? David's a foreman at a medium-sized firm, and I'm a clerk at a clinic. We can't spend half our income on utilities and repairs. Then why did you ask for a house? I asked bluntly. Jessica blushed but didn't look away. We thought we could sell it, buy something smaller and keep the difference. But it turns out you drew up some tricky paperwork and you can't sell. That's it. That's the real reason they're not happy. They were hoping to get the house, sell it quickly and split the proceeds. But I had foreseen this possibility and included a clause in the contract that the house could not be sold for 5 years without the consent of the transfer. At the time, I explained it as a concern for preserving the family nest egg, but really I wanted to avoid this exact situation. That clause was in the documents you signed, I said calmly. I didn't hide it. Mara no ma shon. You didn't explain what it meant. Jessica was indignant. We thought it was a formality. It was written in plain language, I objected. If you had read it carefully, you would have understood. David pushed his plate away and crossed his arms over his chest. So you tricked us, he said gravely. You gave us a house, but you put conditions on it that make it useless to us. I gave you a roof over your head, I replied. A house that cost over $300,000. Not every parent can afford such a gift. A gift? Jessica snorted. It's not a gift, it's a burden. We're now tied to a house we can't keep and can't sell. Great. Her voice rose almost to a shout. I could see the irritation that had been building up in her for months. Maybe we should discuss options, I suggested. Shubershum. If the house is really too much for you. What options? David asked. You're the one who blocked everything with your terms. Not everything, I said carefully. There are certain circumstances under which the restrictions can be lifted. Jessica looked at me warily. What circumstances? If it's proven that the house is being misused or the new owners can't maintain it properly, I answered without giving away all the details. And who will determine that? She asked suspiciously. There are certain procedures, I answered evasively. Jessica looked at me carefully, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was considering something, weighing the possibilities. So you can remove the restrictions if you want to? She clarified. Under certain conditions, yes. I see. She nodded and leaned back in her chair. So we depend on your mood. It's not about mood, I countered. It's about keeping the house a family nest, not a speculative object. Those are nice words, David said. But in reality, you've made us dependent. You gave us something, but you left us in control. The atmosphere at the table became very heavy. I realized that my attempt to provide a home for my daughter had turned into a conflict. But I also realized that their plans were not at all what I had in mind when I handed over the house. I didn't want to control anyone, I said quietly. I wanted to help, to give you a house to live in, not to sell. But it's up to us to decide what we want, Jessica said sharply. We're adults. We can make our own decisions. Of course you can, I agreed. But gifted real estate isn't that simple. Gifted? She interjected. It sounded more like a trap. The conversation had reached a stalemate. I could see that Jessica and David were angry, disappointed, and feeling cheated. From their perspective, I had indeed acted dishonestly by not explaining all the nuances to them fully. But I also realized that if they had known about the restrictions in advance, it's unlikely they would have agreed to those terms. Let's leave it at that, I suggested. We're not going to decide anything now. I just came to visit you, not to pick a fight. Okay, Jessica nodded, but there was no reconciliation in her voice. Just know that we don't want to live like this anymore. Something has to change. After dinner, I helped clean up the dishes, though Jessica looked as if I was a burden to her. David went into the living room and turned on the TV again. I stayed in the kitchen, looking at the familiar cabinets that once held my dishes, my groceries, my memories. Now it all belonged to other people, and those people were clearly not happy with what they had gotten. In the morning, I woke up to the sound of a dripping faucet in the second-floor bathroom. It was the same faucet that had started to drip when I was there, but I kept putting off fixing it, thinking I could do it later. Now the later came, but I was not the one who had to fix the faucet. I lay on the sofa in the living room, covered with an old blanket I remembered from my mother's time, and listened to the familiar sounds of the house, the creak of the floorboards upstairs, the sound of water in the pipes, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. In the evening, Jessica never offered me a decent place to sleep. After dinner, she silently brought the bedding and a pillow, threw them on the couch and said, "You'll sleep here. There's renovations upstairs. Things are scattered everywhere." When I went up to the bathroom before going to bed, though, I noticed that their bed was neatly in my former bedroom, and the guest room was just stacked with boxes of stuff. No renovations had been done there. David was up early around 7:30, stomping loudly up the stairs, making noise in the bathroom, slamming cabinet doors. Either he'd forgotten that someone was sleeping downstairs or hadn't seen fit to consider it. I could hear him talking to Jessica in the kitchen, but I couldn't make out the words, just intonations, rather harsh and irritated. Around 8 in the morning, I finally gave up trying to sleep and got up from the couch. My joints were aching after a night on the uncomfortable surface. The couch was designed for short-term rest, not for a 72-year-old man to sleep on. I folded the bedding, cleaned myself up, and headed for the kitchen. Jessica was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, staring at her phone. She was dressed in work clothes, dark pants, and a light-colored blouse. Her hair was in a tight bun. Her face was wearing makeup, but her expression was tired and disgruntled. "Good morning," I said. "Morning," she replied, not looking up from the screen. "Did David leave for work already?" "Yes. He starts early on Saturdays. They have a facility in the suburbs, a long commute." I poured myself a glass of water and sat down across from my daughter. She continued to read something on her phone, occasionally typing short messages. The coffee pot was on the stove, but she didn't offer me coffee. "Could I have coffee too?" I asked. "Get it yourself," she mumbled. "You know where everything is." I got up and poured myself some coffee into one of my old cups. The coffee was strong and bitter, and it had been brewing for a long time. "What are your plans for the day?" I asked, sitting back down. "Work until lunch, then the grocery store and chores?" Jessica said in a casual voice. "What are you going to do?" "I thought I'd walk around the house, see how things were going, maybe tweak some things, make some adjustments." Jessica looked up from the phone. "I told you yesterday you don't need to control us," she said irritably. "We'll take care of the house ourselves." "It's not control," I countered. "I just want to help. I know the ins and outs of this house where things can break." "You don't have to," she said. So we have hands and heads. We can manage without your supervision." The tone of her voice became frankly rude. I could see that the night hadn't improved her mood, but rather the opposite. She'd woken up more irritable than she'd been the night before. "Jessica, what's going on?" I asked bluntly. "Yesterday you were angry about the house expenses. Today you don't want me to help you cut them down. What's the matter?" She put the phone away and looked at me with an expression of poorly concealed irritation. "The thing is, you come here like a host, and we feel like guests in our own home," she said sharply. "You're always looking, evaluating, looking for faults. You don't let us breathe." "I'm not looking for faults," I objected. "I'm just used to looking after the state of the house." "Exactly. I'm used to it," she flared up. "And now it's not your house, okay? We live here. We decide what we do and how we do it. You're a guest, and guests do not dispose in someone else's house. The last word sounded especially harsh. I sipped my coffee in silence, trying to digest what I'd heard. My own daughter, in the house I'd given her, was telling me that I was a stranger. I see, I said calmly. Then I'll just sit and read. I won't interfere with your life. Ah, I wish you'd given me more notice, Jessica continued, as if she hadn't heard what I'd said. We could have prepared, freed up time, and now you're just dropping in like a snowball. I thought I'd be welcome here, I said, especially since I donated the house. Donated, she snorted. With your conditions and restrictions, it's more like bondage. We got a house we can't sell, but we have to maintain at our own expense. No one forced you to take the house, I reminded her. You asked for it. We asked for a house, and we got a problem, Jessica said sharply. And now you're coming here and claiming that we're not maintaining it properly. I didn't make any claims. Come on. She got up from the table and started pacing the kitchen. You see what we've changed around here, and your looks are more eloquent than words. It's like we've ruined something in your holy home. I realized she was right about one thing. I was really sensitive to the changes in the house. Everything replaced, every rearrangement cut me in the eye. This house had been a part of my life for a quarter of a century, and seeing it rearranged to suit someone else's taste wasn't easy. Maybe I'm just too attached to this place, I admitted. It's just that there are a lot of memories here. Memories are the past, Jessica said stiffly. We live in the present, and we want to live in our own way, not look back at the way things used to be. She looked at the clock on the wall. I gotta go to work. Try not to touch anything in the house while I'm gone. David will be back for lunch. Talk to him if you need anything. Jessica grabbed her purse and keys and headed for the exit. She turned around at the door. One more thing, Dad. Next time, give us advance notice of your visits. We're not ready to have unexpected guests every weekend. After she left, the house was quiet. Only the clock on the wall ticked, and somewhere upstairs the floorboards creaked, the old wood reacting to changes in temperature and humidity. I finished my coffee and washed my cup and put it in the dryer. Then I walked around the house despite Jessica's prohibition. There were indeed many boxes in the dining room. I looked in one of them. There were my books, neatly folded. In another, framed photos, including a wedding photo of me and my late wife. In yet another box were my tools from the workshop in the basement. It appeared that they had just piled all my stuff into boxes and moved it out of the rooms to make room for their own. It wasn't just my books and pictures that were gone in the living room. The painting my wife and I had bought on our honeymoon, a landscape with a lake in a wooden frame, no longer hung on the wall. Instead, it was a metal-framed abstract. The carpet had been replaced, too. Instead of the Persian one that had cost me a month's salary 20 years ago, it was a cheap synthetic one in a geometric pattern. I went up to the second floor. My former bedroom had been completely remodeled. Gone was the wallpaper with a small floral pattern that my wife had chosen, and the walls had been painted a neutral gray. Our old furniture was replaced by a modern bedroom set, a bed, a closet, and a chest of drawers made of laminated chipboard. Even the chandelier was replaced with a simple ceiling light fixture. The guest room, as I thought, was just boxes of stuff and old furniture. No renovations had been done there. Jessica had lied to me about the renovations, just to keep me out of the normal room. The bathroom had changed, too. The wooden frame mirror that had hung there since the house was built had been replaced with a modern one without a frame. The shelves for cosmetics and medicines have been rearranged, and some new hooks and holders have been added. And of course, the dripping faucet that I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years now. I went down to the basement. My workshop was trashed. The workbench was littered with boxes of some kind. Tools were stacked in a pile in the corner. The woodworking machine was pushed up against the wall and covered with tape. Apparently, David had decided he didn't need the workshop and had turned the basement into a storage area. Back on the first floor, I sat down in the living room chair, the only furniture left from my time there. The house was both mine and not mine at the same time. The layout, the walls, the windows were all familiar, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Gone was the warmth, the coziness, the special energy that my wife and I had been creating for years. Now it was just a dwelling, functional and impersonal. I understood that Jessica and David had the right to customize the house to their liking, but it was painful to see traces of my past life disappear, as if those 25 years had never happened. It was especially painful to realize that my daughter saw my visits as an invasion of her personal territory. Around noon, David returned. He looked tired and dirty from his work on the construction site, his overalls stained, his boots clayed, his hair disheveled. "Hi," he said, walking past the chair where I was reading a magazine. "Did Jessica leave already?" "Yeah, she went to work," I answered. "She said she was working through lunch." "Uh-huh," David nodded and headed for the stairs. "I'm going to take a shower, and then we'll have lunch." He went upstairs, and soon I heard the sound of water in the bathroom. The shower ran for a long time, about 15 minutes. Then David came downstairs in clean clothes with wet hair and went into the kitchen. I could hear him rattling dishes, opening the refrigerator, cooking something. "Do you want some lunch?" he shouted from the kitchen. "Yes, thank you," I answered and went to him. David heated up the rest of last night's farce spaghetti in the microwave and took a can of beer out of the refrigerator. He put the pasta on a plate for me, too. "How are things going at the construction site?" I asked, sitting down at the table. "Fine. We're building a private house, a big one. The owners are rich, and every day they demand something new. That they have the walls at the wrong angle, or the ceilings seem low. They're fed up." David sipped his beer and began to eat. He ate quickly with the appetite of a man who had been physically working since morning. "Are the customers adequate?" I continued the conversation. "How can I put it?" David shrugged. "They have a lot of money, but not enough brains. They want everything at once and quickly, and it takes time to do it well. But they pay well, I guess." "They do," he agreed, "but they get on their nerves a lot, especially the owner's wife. Every day she comes, criticizes everyone, makes remarks. She thinks that if she gives money, she can command everyone." There was irritation in his voice, and I realized that David didn't tolerate control from his customers very well. He liked to work on his own, without constant supervision. We ate in relative silence. David was not a talker, especially when he was tired. After dinner, he took another can of beer and suggested we watch sports on TV. "There's hockey on tonight," he said. "The Red Wings are playing. It might be interesting." "Sure," I agreed, though I had little interest in hockey. We went into the living room. David turned on the TV and found the sports channel. The screen showed the team's pre-match warm-up. The commentators were discussing the lineups and their chances of winning. "When will Jessica be back?" I asked. "About 4 o'clock, I guess," David answered. "She'll also go to the store after work. She said she needed to pick up some groceries." We watched the game in silence. David occasionally commented on what was happening on the ice and explained the rules, which I didn't understand. Gradually, the beer did its job, and he became more talkative. "Listen, Russell," he said during a break between periods. "Sarah, what about the deeds to the house? Is there any way to review them?" "What do you mean?" I clarified, although I knew what he was getting at. "Well, these restrictions on the sale, maybe they can be removed?" "We've been thinking. The house is a little big for us. We'd rather get something smaller and keep the difference in the money. So they're back to the idea after all. Get the house, sell it, buy something cheaper, and use the rest of the money for their own needs. That's what I was afraid of when I drew up the contract." "The restrictions can't be lifted," I said firmly. "The house was given for living, not for sale." "But we can't maintain it properly," David objected. "You see how much it costs. It's hard for us." "Then maybe we should think about returning the house," I suggested, "if it doesn't suit you." David looked at me carefully. "Would you take it back?" "Under certain circumstances, yes," I answered cautiously. "What circumstances?" "If it became clear that the new owners weren't doing a good job of maintaining the property," I said, quoting one of the clauses in the contract. David hesitated. I could see that he was considering the possibilities, weighing his options. "What if we wanted the house back? Voluntarily?" he asked. "Ashwintori. We'd have to talk to a lawyer about that," I said evasively. "The repossession procedure is complicated. In fact, I knew that there was a clause in the contract about the possibility of voluntary return, but I didn't want to discuss it now. I needed to understand how serious their intentions were. "But it's possible in principle." David kept up. "It's possible," I nodded, "but it's a last resort." David sipped his beer and stared again at the screen, where the game had resumed. But I could see that he was thinking more about our conversation than watching the hockey. Around 4, Jessica returned with bags of groceries. Her mood hadn't improved. She was as irritable and tense as she'd been that morning. "How's it going?" David asked as she went into the kitchen to put away the groceries. "Fine," she answered briefly. "Work is like work." I went to the kitchen to offer help with the groceries. "No need," Jessica said sharply. "I can do it myself." She was putting groceries into the refrigerator and cabinets with quick, sharp movements. It was obvious that my presence annoyed her. "Why don't we talk?" I suggested it. "Let's discuss the situation calmly." "What situation?" she asked without turning around. "The house. David says you're having a hard time keeping it." Jessica turned to face me. Her eyes were tired and annoyed. "What's there to talk about?" she said tiredly. "You're not going to change anything. Your house, your rules." "That's not entirely true," I argued. "There are options." "What options?" Her voice became more interested. "We can discuss taking the house back if it's really not right for you," I said. Jessica froze, holding the pasta in her hands. "Really?" she asked. "Would you take the house back?" "If that's what you really want, yes," I answered. "But you have to think it through. It's a big decision." She put the pasta on the shelf and leaned against the countertop. "You know, Dad, maybe this really is the best thing to do," she said thoughtfully. "We get our freedom and you get your house back. Everyone will be happy." There was a note of relief in her voice, like she'd seen the light at the end of the tunnel. And that made me wary. The evening passed in a strange atmosphere of strained anticipation. After the conversation in the kitchen, Jessica had perked up, as if a weight had been lifted off her mind. She even prepared a more substantial dinner than she had the night before. Chicken and potatoes, fresh vegetable salad. She was almost conversational at the table, talking about her work, her co-workers, asking about my apartment. David seemed less tense too, sometimes even joking. But I sensed a catch. The too abrupt change in their behavior was alarming. Jessica had barely spoken to me the morning before, and now she was interested in my plans for the next week. David, who usually went straight to the TV after dinner, stayed at the table and kept the conversation going. Something wasn't right here. "When are you leaving tomorrow?" Jessica asked, clearing the plates after dinner. "I was planning on leaving after lunch," I answered. "If you don't mind." "Of course not," she said quickly. "Stay as long as you want. Just wondering." All too quickly, she agreed. 24 hours ago, she'd been making remarks about giving me advance notice of visits, and now she was offering to stay longer. "Maybe you'll even stay until Monday," David added. "Tomorrow is Sunday. We can do something together, like clean up the garage, for example." I looked at him in surprise. Yesterday, he'd let me know he didn't want my help, and now he was offering to work with me. "We'll see," I said cautiously. "Depends on the circumstances." After dinner, we settled back in the living room. David turned on the TV, but he turned it down a little more than usual. Jessica sat next to him on the couch and picked up a magazine. I settled into the chair with a book I'd grabbed from home. The time stretched slowly. There was some movie on TV, but no one was really watching. Jessica was flipping through a magazine, not lingering on the pages. David glanced at his phone every now and then. I tried to read, but I couldn't concentrate. The tension in the air was too palpable. Around 10 p.m., Jessica yawned and stretched. "I'm tired today," she said. "I'm going to get ready for bed. I have to get up early tomorrow." "Wake up early on Sunday?" I was surprised. "Yes, I want to get things done in the morning while I still have time," she explained. "Laundry, cleaning, cooking for the week." She got up from the couch and headed out of the living room. She stopped at the door and turned to me. "Daddy, where are you going to sleep tonight?" she asked in a tone as if she had just thought of it. "Right here on the couch, like yesterday," I answered. "If you don't mind." Jessica frowned and shook her head. "You know, the couch isn't comfortable for sleeping. You're an old man. It's going to hurt your back. It's not good." "It's okay. I'll be fine for one night," I said. "It's not the first time." "No, no," Jessica waved her hands. "What kind of hospitality is this, leaving my father on the couch in the living room?" David pulled away from the TV and looked at his wife with some surprise. Apparently, they hadn't discussed my sleeping arrangements beforehand. "Where should I sleep?" I asked. Your stuff is all over the place upstairs. You said so yourself. Wait a minute, Jessica said, and left the living room. She came back a minute later. You know what? There's an option. Remember the closet under the stairs? There's a space just opened up there. We could put a cot in there. I looked at her puzzled. The pantry under the stairs was a tiny room where I kept tools and other household stuff. It was about a meter by a meter and a half at most. It was almost impossible for a person to fit in there. In the pantry? I asked. There's no room in there. There is, Jessica assured me. We hardly put anything in there. The cot will fit right in there. It'll be as cozy as our own cabin. David didn't say anything, but I could see that he was tense and watching the conversation intently. It was obvious that he hadn't expected his wife to suggest it. Jessica, it's a closet, I said calmly. Doesn't even have a window, and the ceiling is low. It'll be quiet, she insisted, and no one will be in the way. What's the window for? To sleep at night. There was a strange note in her voice, almost amused, like she was amused by the idea of putting me in the closet. Look, Jess, David interjected. Maybe we shouldn't. A man can sleep on the couch without falling apart. What's the big deal? Jessica objected. The pantry is clean, ventilated. The cot's comfortable. It'll be like a private room. She stood up and headed for the door. Come on, I'll show you. You'll see it's quite normal. I got up and followed her, even though I remembered the size of the closet. David also got up and followed us, obviously concerned about his wife's behavior. Jessica opened the door of the closet under the stairs. It was indeed empty inside, just a few shelves on the walls and a broom in the corner. But the size of the room was exactly as I remembered. Tiny. See? Jessica said, peering inside. The cot will fit right in. We'll put it along the wall. You can't stand up to your full height there, I said. The ceiling under the stairs is slanted. So what? You'll be sleeping, not standing, she said. You can lie down and stand up. The main thing is that it's a separate space. David glanced over my shoulder and grimaced. Jess, this is ridiculous, he said quietly, putting a person in the closet. Why would it be bullying? Jessica was indignant. It's a normal place. Quiet, cozy, even better than the living room on the couch. She turned to me and smiled the smile I remembered from her childhood, when she'd do something she knew was wrong, but she'd do it out of spite. Isn't that right, Daddy? She said in a sweet voice. You only belong in a cramped closet. Make yourself comfortable, beloved father. The last words were spoken with a sneer. The mask of politeness and filial concern that she had been wearing for the past 2 days had finally fallen off. There was an undisguised triumph in her eyes, as if she could finally show me my true place in this house. David turned pale and grabbed his wife's arm. Jess, what are you talking about? He hissed. Get your mind right. What's the big deal? She asked innocently, but there was still mockery in her voice. I offered Daddy a comfortable place to sleep. He said he didn't want to be disturbed. I stood silent, looking at my daughter. In that moment, a lot of things became clear. All her ostensible interest in returning home, her evening cordiality, her offers to stay longer. It was all a game. She wanted to humiliate me, to put me in my place, to show me who was the master of the house. I see, I said calmly. So it's a cramped closet. Don't be offended, Daddy, Jessica continued in the same sweet tone. It's just temporary. Maybe you should visit less often. We're used to living our own lives without constant supervision. David tugged her arm tighter. Shut up, he hissed. You've gone too far. Why? Jessica shrugged her shoulders. I'm telling the truth. We're adults. We want to live on our own. And here he is, checking everything, controlling everything. I'm sick of it. She looked at me defiantly. You understand, don't you, Dad? We're grateful for the house, but we want to decide for ourselves how to live in it. And your constant visits are stressing us out. Jessica, I said quietly. I get it. Good, she nodded. So next time, give us a little more notice. Or better yet, come less often. Once a month, for example, or 2 months. David let go of her hand and took a step back. It was obvious that he did not expect such cruelty from his wife and did not know how to react. The cot is in the garage, he told me, avoiding looking at Jessica. I'll get it right away. No, I stopped him. I'll sleep on the couch. Why? Jessica asked in surprise. I offered you a great place. Separate, quiet, Sure occurred. Thank you for your concern, I said, but the couch is fine for me. Suit yourself, she shrugged. I tried to find the best option. We went back into the living room. The atmosphere had gotten quite heavy. David sat in a chair and stared at the television, but it was obvious that he couldn't see or hear anything. Jessica sat down on the couch, picked up a magazine, and started flipping through it, whistling a tune. Shimon. Well, I'm going to bed, she said after about 10 minutes. I have to get up early tomorrow. She got up and headed for the exit. She stopped at the door and turned around. Good night, Daddy. Sweet dreams in our welcoming home. After she left, the air seemed to lighten. David turned off the TV and turned to me. Russell, I'm sorry, he said quietly. I don't know what got into her. She's not usually like this. Usually in front of me, I corrected him, and today she showed me her true attitude. She's tired at work, nervous, David tried to justify his wife. Plus these problems with the house, money, it's all weighing on her. I understand, I nodded. Don't worry, it's okay. But nothing was really normal. My own daughter had just offered to sleep in the closet while calling me beloved father with a mocking tone. It was hurtful and humiliating. David brought me bedding and helped me unmake the couch. Then he said goodnight and went to his room, and I was left alone in the living room, which had once been the heart of my home, but was now a place where I was tolerated out of politeness. I lay awake for a long time, replaying in my mind the events of the evening. Jessica's words, "You belong in the closet, make yourself comfortable, beloved father," were particularly memorable. This phrase revealed her true attitude towards me. I was not a father to her, but a nuisance, a man who prevented her from living the life she wanted. Somewhere around midnight, I made a decision. What happened tonight was the last straw. Jessica had shown me how she really felt about me, and that gave me the right to use the leverage I'd thoughtfully built into the deed to the house. Tomorrow I'd leave, and I'd take action. I had a plan, and now I had a reason to put it into action. There's a special clause in the deed for a reason. Jessica had no idea of the consequences of her behavior today. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. The contours of future actions were already forming in my head. My daughter wanted to show me my place? Fine. Now I would show her her place. Sunday morning began with rain. Droplets were tapping on the living room windows when I woke up to the sound of the front door slamming. Jessica had gone about her business without even saying goodbye. David was in the kitchen making breakfast. I folded the linens, cleaned myself up, and joined him. Coffee? My son-in-law offered, pointing to the pot on the stove. Thank you. We sat at the table, sipping coffee and listening to the sound of the rain. David looked embarrassed and avoided making eye contact with me. Apparently his wife's behavior the day before had embarrassed him too. She didn't mean it that way, he said finally. She was just tired. It's understandable, I said calmly. Don't worry. Why don't you talk to her? Explain that you didn't want to control or interfere. I don't think talking isn't going to help, I said. Some things are better left as they are. David nodded, but I could see he didn't fully understand what I meant. It was for the best. The less he knew about my plans, the easier it would be to accomplish everything. Around 10 in the morning, I packed my things and said goodbye to David. Jessica wasn't home, but I wasn't expecting her back. Our relationship after last night had reached a point where it was pointless to pretend. Tell Jessica I'm not angry, I said to my son-in-law. Let her live in peace. I will, David nodded. And you come again. Maybe next time it will be different. I smiled without answering. Next time would be different, but not the way he thought it would be. The drive home took half an hour. The rain was getting heavier, and the windshield wipers could barely handle the streams of water on the windshield. I drove slowly, cautiously, thinking about what I was going to do. In those 30 minutes, a plan had finally formed in my head. At home, the first thing I took out of the safe was a folder with the documents on the house. The real estate transfer agreement consisted of 10 pages of small print. Most of the clauses were standard, but 3 of them I had drafted especially carefully with lawyer Howard Fisher. Howard Fisher was an experienced real estate lawyer whom I had met 10 years earlier when I was probating my parents' estate. A 53-year-old man, thorough, with a reputation as an honest professional. When I decided to pass the house on to Jessica, he was the man I turned to. Then 3 months ago, we had a long discussion about the legalities of transferring real estate. Howard warned me of potential problems and offered various options to protect my interests. He had insisted on several special clauses in the contract that had seemed to me to be unnecessary precautions at the time. Now I was rereading those clauses with special attention. Clause 17 stipulated the conditions of the property's maintenance and the obligations of the new owners to ensure that the property was in good condition. Clause 18 dealt with the transferor's right to visit the property and monitor its condition. And paragraph 19, the most important one, defined the grounds for unilateral termination of the contract. Among these grounds, there were several formal points: non-payment of taxes, use of the property for commercial purposes, a significant change in the purpose of the object. But there was one clause which Howard included at my request after much persuasion: inappropriate treatment of the transferor during visits, creating humiliating or discomforting conditions for the former owner. At the time, Howard questioned the wording. "It's too subjective," he said. "What counts as inappropriate treatment? Where is the line between a family quarrel and grounds for termination?" "I hope this clause never comes in handy," I replied, "but if it comes to humiliation, it's better to have a legal defense." "Okay," Howard agreed then, "but the wording should be more specific. Offering to sleep in an unsuitable room, public insults, creating unbearable conditions of stay, something like that." We worked on the wording for a few hours until we got the clarity we needed. In the final version of the contract, Clause 19b read, "Grounds for unilateral termination of the contract by the transfer shall be the creation by the transferees of humiliating conditions of stay for the transferor during visits, including, but not limited to, offering accommodation in uninhabitable premises, public insults, demonstrative disrespect for the transferor's personality, party." Rereading this paragraph, I realized that the events of last night definitely fall within its scope. Offering to sleep in the closet with mocking comments was exactly what Howard had in mind when we discussed uninhabitable rooms. I glanced at my watch. It was 11:30 on a Sunday morning. Howard didn't usually work on weekends, but he had a cell phone for emergencies. I dialed his number. "Russell." The lawyer's surprised voice came through after the second ring. "Is something wrong?" "Good morning, Howard. Sorry to bother you on your day off. I need a consultation on the deed of conveyance." "Is there a problem?" Howard's voice has a business-like quality to it. "It could be. Could we meet today? I'd be willing to come to your place or the office." Sure. The office would be better. I have all the paperwork at my fingertips. Would 2 in the afternoon be okay?" "Great. I'll see you at 2 term." Howard Fisher's office was located in the business center of the city, on the 7th floor of a modern building. Even on Sunday, there was security, and I had to sign in at the visitor's log. The elevator took me to the right floor, where the sign "Fisher and Associates Legal Services" hung in the spacious lobby. Howard met me in the reception area. He was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater instead of his usual strict suit. But even in informal settings, he looked solid and professional. "Come into the office," he said, shaking my hand. "Tell me what happened." Howard's office was furnished with expensive dark wood furniture. There were 2 leather armchairs behind a wide desk, diplomas and certificates hanging on the walls, and shelves full of legal reference books. The place smelled of leather, paper, and expensive men's perfume. "Coffee? Water?" Howard offered, making himself comfortable at the table. "Water, please." He poured me a glass from the cooler in the corner of the office, took a cup of cold coffee, and prepared to listen. "So you're having trouble with your daughter in the house?" he began. "You could say that," I nodded. "Remember our conversation 3 months ago about the special clauses in the contract?" "Sure, especially the inappropriate treatment clause. You insisted on including it then, even though I thought it was an unnecessary precaution." "Well, it turns out it wasn't," I said, and recounted the events of the weekend. Howard listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I got to the pantry episode, he raised his eyebrows. "You only belong in a cramped pantry. Make yourself comfortable, beloved father," he interjected. That's exactly what she'd said. Word for word, in front of her husband. "And the pantry is really uninhabitable? 1.5 meters by 1 meter, beveled ceiling, no window, no ventilation. Used to store tools in there." Howard pulled a file from his desk drawer and began flipping through the pages. Let's see. Paragraph 19. Bay. He ran his finger along the lines. Offering accommodation in unsuitable quarters and demonstrative disrespect for the identity of the transmitting party. Yes, technically that would fall under the clause. Technically, I clarified. Well, you see, Russell, one thing is the legal wording, another thing is how the court will take it. You have to consider the circumstances, family conflict, emotions, possible excuses. So the clause doesn't work? It works, but you have to apply it correctly, Howard explained. First, it requires written notice of a breach of contract. Secondly, you have to give a period of time to correct the breach, usually 30 days. And only then can you file for termination. And if the breach is not cured, then we have every reason to unilaterally terminate the contract and return the property, Howard said. But there are nuances. The daughter may try to challenge our interpretation of events. Say it was a joke, a misunderstanding, a result of stress. Hopper, we have a witness, her husband, I reminded her. He's not likely to testify against his wife, Howard said, though if he's a decent man, he might tell the truth. But you can't count on that. Howard leaned back in his chair and considered the situation for a few seconds. Russell, I must warn you, these cases can be very painful. The litigation with your own daughter, the publicity, the possible countersuits. Are you sure you want to go down that road? What are the alternatives? I asked. We could try to negotiate peacefully. For example, offer them a buyout at a reduced price, or exchange it for a smaller property with an additional payment. There are many options. They've already shown their attitude toward me, I said firmly. It's only going to get worse. I don't want to turn every visit to my daughter into a humiliation. I understand, Howard nodded. Then we'll proceed legally. The first step is a written notice of breach of contract. I'll draw it up and send it by registered mail. Then we wait 30 days. And what exactly will be in the notice? Let's list the facts of the breach. Offering unsuitable accommodation, abusive language, creating a humiliating environment. We'll cite Clause 19B of the contract. We will demand the cessation of such behavior and give them a period of time to correct the situation. And if they don't change their attitude in a month, apply to the court for termination of the contract of transfer of real estate. If there are documentary grounds, the chances of winning the case are high, especially if there are new incidents. Howard took a pen and began to sketch out a plan of action on a piece of paper. One more thing, he said, keeping his eyes on his notes. There is a clause in the contract stating that in case of termination through the fault of the receiving party, the transferring party will be reimbursed for all legal fees and court costs. So if we win, they pay for everything. That's good, huh? I said. How long will the whole procedure take? From notification to judgment. 3 or 4 months if they don't fight hard. If they start actively challenging, it could take 6 months. I'm fine with that. Howard put down his pen and looked at me seriously. Russell, I'm asking you again. Do you really want to sue your daughter? Think about it. Family ties are rarely repaired after something like this. Family ties have already been broken, I replied. Not by me. I'm just adjusting the legal situation to the actual situation. Good. Then I'll start preparing the documents tomorrow. We'll send the notice on Tuesday. They'll have it by Wednesday. Do I have to do anything? Not yet. Wait for their reaction. Maybe they'll try to contact you, apologize, explain what happened, but it won't have any legal significance. The procedure has been initiated. We discussed a few more technicalities and I was about to leave. Howard stopped me on the way out. Russell, what if they agreed to give the house back voluntarily, without a trial? That's the best option, I said. Quick and quiet. Then I'll include a clause in the notice about the possibility of voluntary termination of the contract. If within 30 days they sign the agreement to return, there will be no court proceedings. That's great. We shook hands and I took the elevator down to the lobby. It was still raining outside, but it didn't bother me. For the first time in days, I felt like I had the situation under control. I had a plan, I had legal grounds, I had an experienced lawyer. Jessica thought she had put me in my place by showing me where my real place was in her house. Pretty soon she would find out what it was like to be in someone else's shoes herself. On the way home, I stopped at the supermarket for groceries. The store was full of couples with children on their day off. Young parents were choosing groceries for the week. Children were asking for sweets. Old people were studying the prices of medicines in the pharmacy department. The usual Sunday picture of quiet family life. Once upon a time, my wife and I used to go shopping like this too. Jessica was little and was always asking for something. Toys, ice cream, brightly colored packages with unknown contents. My wife would buy her children's books. I would pick out fruits and vegetables. We were an ordinary family with our own joys and problems. Where did it all get lost? When did my daughter turn into a stranger who might suggest her own father sleep in the closet? Maybe I missed something in her upbringing? Or is it just the kind of person that grew out of a sweet child? I don't know. It doesn't matter anymore. What's important is what's happening now. And right now we have a conflict of interest that can only be resolved through the law. At home, I had dinner, watched the news, and went to bed early. Tomorrow was the beginning of a new stage of the confrontation with my daughter, a phase I plan to win. Wednesday started with a phone call. I was eating breakfast while reading the morning paper when the house phone rang. It was 8 in the morning on the clock, a little early for regular calls. I picked up the phone and heard Jessica's excited voice. "Daddy, what is this letter you sent us?" She spoke quickly, nervously. "Good morning, Jessica," I answered calmly. "What letter are we talking about?" "Don't pretend," she flared up. "A legal notice from a lawyer about a breach of contract. What does that mean?" It meant that the registered letter had arrived faster than Howard had expected. Usually the post office was slower, but this time it took a day. "It means what it says," I said. "You violated the terms of the deed to the house." "What terms?" Nara, Jessica's voice rose to a shout. "We haven't violated anything." "Reread the letter carefully," I advised. "It's all spelled out in detail." "I've already read it," she shouted into the phone. "It says some nonsense about inappropriate treatment and unsuitable premises." "Are you crazy?" "I'm perfectly healthy," I replied. "Saka, and I remember every word you said on Sunday night." There was a short pause. Apparently, Jessica was remembering that conversation in the pantry. "It was a joke," she exclaimed at last. "You can't take a family joke seriously." "A joke?" I interjected. "You only belong in a cramped closet. Make yourself comfortable. Beloved father is a joke?" Well, I was tired, annoyed. I said too much. It happens in families. It happens, I agree. And these things have consequences. "Dad, you can't seriously want to take the house back, can you?" There was a pleading tone in Jessica's voice. "It's our house now. We've put so much money into it." "What money?" I clarified. "As I recall, you were complaining that you couldn't keep it up." "Well, utilities, minor repairs. That's money too." "So, the letter says that you have 30 days to fix the situation," I said in a businesslike manner. "If during this time the attitude will change, the problem can be considered solved." "What attitude? What do you want from us?" "Elementary respect," I answered. "Nothing supernatural." "We respect you," Jessica protested. "It just didn't work out that way. I wasn't in the mood." "Jessica, I have to go to work," I said, even though I'd been retired for 2 years. "Discuss the letter with your husband and the lawyer if you think you need to. You have time to think about it." "Dad, wait. Let's meet and talk calmly. Everything can be solved in a family way, without lawyers and documents." "The time for a family decision was on Sunday," I answered. "Then you chose another way." "I apologize. Please forgive me. I realize I was wrong." I could hear the tears in her voice, but I remembered how easily Jessica had been able to cry since she was a little girl, when she wanted to get her way. "Apology accepted," I said. "But the legal process is already in motion. If you want to stop it, there's only one way, and that's to voluntarily agree to terminate the contract." "You mean give up the house?" she gasped. "Either that or wait for a court decision in a few months." "But we're not going anywhere. We don't have another place to live." "That's not my problem," I said firmly. "When you offered me the closet, you didn't think about the fact that I might not have another place." "It was a joke," she screamed again. "I repeat, jokes have consequences, especially jokes like that." I hung up. A minute later, the phone rang again, but I didn't answer it. A few minutes later, it rang again. In just half an hour, Jessica called 7 times, but I didn't pick up. There was nothing to talk about. Everything had been said. Around 10 in the morning, Howard called. "Russell, I've got news for you," he said. "Your daughter's daughter just called. She wanted to know the details of the legal procedure." "What did you tell her?" "What I have a right to tell her. I confirmed that the letter was sent on your instructions, explained the nature of the claim, told her about the possible consequences." "How did she react?" It varied. First she was indignant, then she tried to negotiate, then she threatened a countersuit. Standard behavior in these cases." "Threatened?" I was surprised. "Threatened me with what?" "She said she would accuse you of forcing her to sign a contract under duress. She said you were taking advantage of her difficult financial situation and emotional dependence." I laughed. "That's ridiculous. We have tapes of our meetings, witnesses to the negotiations. I didn't coerce anyone." "Of course they're empty threats," Howard agreed. "Desperate people grasp at straws." But I warned her that false accusations could result in additional sanctions. "And what did she say to that?" She changed her tone. She started asking about the possibility of a settlement, wondering if there was any way to settle without taking the house back. "What did you say?" "That all the terms were outlined in the letter. Either you stop the violations and change your behavior, or you return the property voluntarily. There's no other options at this time." "That's good. So what's next?" "We wait. They have 30 days to think about it. We'll see what they choose." After talking to Howard, I went to the gym. I'd been doing regular swimming and light exercise for the past few months. The doctor had advised me to keep fit. Today, exercise helped take my mind off my family problems. There were few people in the pool, a few pensioners like me, a young woman who swam very fast and professionally, a couple of teenagers. The water was warm, pleasant. I swam 20 lanes of crawl, then switched to breaststroke. The monotonous motions were soothing, helped put my thoughts in order. I had no regrets about the procedure. Jessica had driven the situation to the extreme. If she had apologized sincerely that night, admitted she was wrong, promised not to behave like that again, everything could have been resolved without lawyers. But she didn't. Moreover, in the morning she left the house without even saying goodbye, showing complete indifference to my feelings. Now she was afraid of the consequences and tried to portray her behavior as an innocent family joke. But some jokes cross all boundaries, and boundaries should have protectors. After the gym, I stopped by the grocery store and the bank. The mundane routines of life help keep life feeling normal. The teller at the bank, the clerk at the store, the passers-by on the street, all of them were unaware of my family problems and treated me like a normal older man. It was pleasant. At home, I had a surprise waiting for me. There were 12 messages on the answering machine, 11 from Jessica and 1 from David. I listened to them all in succession. Jessica tried to explain in the first messages that it was all a misunderstanding. In the middle ones, she apologized and begged me to retract the letter. In the last, she cried and told me I was ruining her life. The emotional swings were impressive. David's message was more subdued. He asked me to call back and calmly discuss the situation. Said that Jessica was very upset and was ready for any apology just to settle the conflict. I didn't call anyone back. Instead, I made dinner, watched the news, and sat down to read a book. The phone kept ringing until late afternoon, but I didn't answer. The next day, Thursday, the calls increased in frequency. Jessica called every half hour. At lunchtime, David tried calling, then Jessica again. I stopped coming to the phone altogether, letting the answering machine record the messages. By Thursday evening, I had accumulated 23 messages. They ranged from pleas for forgiveness to accusations of cruelty. Jessica was clearly flitting between different behavioral strategies, not knowing which one would work. On Friday morning, she changed tactics. Instead of calling, she came in person. I saw her from my window. She stood in the driveway of my house and pressed the intercom button. I didn't answer. Then she started calling on her cell phone, which I didn't pick up either. Jessica stood under the windows for over an hour. Sometimes she walked back and forth. Sometimes she sat down on a bench. She went to the intercom a few times, but I wasn't going to talk to her. Everything that needed to be said had already been said through the lawyer. Around noon, she finally left. There was a new message on the answering machine. "Dad, I know you're home. Why won't you talk to me? We're family." Is one stupid phrase more important than family? One stupid phrase, that's what she was calling her behavior now. Not cruel humiliation or unacceptable rudeness, but one stupid sentence. Even now, she didn't realize the seriousness of what had happened. On Saturday, David tried a different approach. He came in the morning and stood under the windows without ringing the intercom. He just stood there and waited. When I looked out the window, he waved and gestured that he wanted to talk. I thought for a moment and decided to listen to him. David was the only witness to Sunday's incident, and his position could be important. "Come in," I said into the intercom. David came up to my floor panting and excited. He looked tired, aged over the week. "Thanks for meeting me," he said as he entered the apartment. Come in, sit down. Do you want coffee?" "Yes, thank you." We sat down in the kitchen. David was fidgeting with his cap and obviously searching for words. "Russell, I realized Jessica's behavior was wrong," he began, "but she's really sorry about what happened. Really sorry." "I see," I nodded. "So what's the next step? Isn't there some way to settle this peacefully, without all these lawyers and courts?" "The way of peaceful settlement is specified in the letter," I reminded. "Voluntary return of the house." "But we can't just move in," David exclaimed. "We don't have money to rent another place. We don't have time to look. It's not that easy." "Was I just supposed to sleep in the closet?" I asked. David blushed and lowered his eyes. "I told you then that it was wrong. Tried to stop her." "Tried, but I didn't stop her." "I couldn't forcefully shut her up," he flared up. "Yes, she was wrong. Yes, she was disgusting. But is that really a reason to destroy a family?" "I didn't destroy the family," I said calmly. "I'm just adjusting the legal situation to the real relationship." "What real relationship?" David didn't understand. "Your wife has made it clear that she considers me a burden that belongs in the closet. Why would such a burden want to own a house?" David paused for a moment, considering my words. "What if she formally apologized?" he suggested. "Publicly admit she was wrong?" "The time to apologize was Sunday night," I replied. "Now it's too late." "But people make mistakes sometimes," David exclaimed. "They say the wrong things, they act stupidly. Is it really necessary to punish them so severely?" "It's not a punishment," I argued. "It's a natural consequence of behavior. If you treat a man as a beggar, you should not be surprised that he does not want to give you a house." "But the house has already been given. The papers have been signed, with conditions that have been violated, and a breach of the terms results in the termination of the contract." David realized his arguments weren't working, so he tried another tactic. "Russell, what will you do with the house if you get it back?" he asked. "You said yourself that it was too big for one person." "I might sell it," I said. "I'll buy a bigger apartment and put the rest of the money in the bank. So you'll get the house and the money, and we'll be left with nothing? What do you have to lose?" I was surprised. The house was given for free. It's returned for free, no financial loss. "What do you mean, no loss?" David was indignant. "We invested money in renovations, in furnishings." "What repairs?" and I clarified. "As far as I remember, you only painted the walls and changed the curtains. That's money too. Pennies compared to the value of the house." David realized that he was losing the argument, so he turned to emotional arguments. "Do you really want to leave your own daughter without a roof over her head?" he asked reproachfully. "My own daughter chose this outcome," I replied, "when she offered to let me sleep in the closet." "Those are words." "They're just words." "Words matter, David, especially when they express a person's true attitude." We talked for another half hour, but David couldn't come up with anything that would change my position. Eventually, he realized this and got ready to leave. "So no compromise?" he asked at the door. "There is only one compromise possible. Voluntary return of the house," I answered. "Shibwin, then the procedure will go quickly and without publicity. And if we refuse, then in a month the court proceedings will begin. The outcome is predictable, but it will take longer." David nodded and left. I was left wondering what choice they would make. As a matter of principle, I didn't care. Both the trial and the voluntary agreement would lead to the same result, but the quicker option would be preferable. There were 2 weeks left before the ultimatum expired. It was interesting to see how Jessica and David would behave when they realized there was no retreat. On Tuesday, 2 weeks after I'd sent the notice, I got a call from Howard. His voice sounded tired and slightly irritated. "Russell, we have news," he said. "Your daughter has hired a lawyer, Robert Stanley of Stanley and Associates. Is that good or bad?" I asked. Stanley is an experienced family and probate law specialist, expensive and tenacious. Apparently, they've decided to put up a serious fight. What's he suggesting? I received a formal request yesterday. They want all the documentation on the contract, records of our consultations, correspondence. It's standard procedure. They're looking for leads to challenge. I knew Jessica wouldn't just give up. In 2 weeks, she must have consulted with different people, looking for ways to overturn my decision. Someone must have advised her to contact a serious lawyer. On Thursday, Howard called again. "Stanley has sent me a formal letter of objection," he said. 12 pages of legal text. "Would you like me to go over the highlights?" "Sure." 1. They claim the mistreatment clause is too vague and can be interpreted arbitrarily. 2. The pantry incident was a domestic dispute with no legal ramifications. 3. You allegedly used your position as a creditor to pressure the debtors. "And what did you say to them?" "Nothing yet. I'm studying their arguments, preparing counter-arguments. But overall, their position is weak. The facts are against them." Friday night, Jessica came to my house. This time she wasn't alone. She was with a middle-aged man in an expensive suit. Tall, gray-haired, with intelligent eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. Robert Stanley himself. "Mr. Carter?" He introduced himself when I opened the door. "Robert Stanley, your daughter's attorney. Can we talk?" "Any questions through my lawyer," I answered. "Nasha one. I understand your position," Stanley nodded. "But sometimes a face-to-face conversation can avoid a lengthy lawsuit. I'm not going to pressure you or threaten you. I'd just like to know your true intentions." "My intentions are set forth in the official notice," I said. "Dad, please," Jessica intervened. "Give us 5 minutes. Mr. Stanley wants to find a solution that works for everyone." 5 minutes, I agreed. "But the conversation will be recorded." We went into the living room. Stanley began by trying to challenge the validity of the contract, but quickly realized that the documents were professionally drafted. Then he turned to emotional arguments, offering compromises, threatening countersuits. Nothing worked. "Mr. Carter, we have reason to believe that the contract contains bondage," he finally said. "The mistreatment clause gives you unlimited power over the recipients of the house." "That's not a caprice," I objected. "It's basic human dignity." Nevertheless, a court could invalidate the clause. "It might," I agreed, "and it might not, especially if he hears the tape of that conversation in the pantry." "What tape?" Jessica perked up. "I have a recording of our conversation on my phone from Sunday night," I said calmly. "I accidentally turned on the recorder. It wasn't true, but I wanted to see their reaction." Jessica turned pale, and Stanley tensed up. After they left, I realized that their position was even weaker than it appeared. An experienced attorney wouldn't waste time on personal visits if they had serious legal bargaining chips. The 31st day after the notice was sent fell on a Friday. The ultimatum expired at midnight, but there was still no response from Jessica and David. No apology, no agreement to voluntarily return the house, and no offer to settle the conflict. On Monday morning, Howard filed a statement of claim in circuit court. Attached to the petition was a complete packet of documents: the deed to the house, a copy of the notice of violation, correspondence with Jessica's attorney, and David's affidavit of the events of that Sunday night. "David actually testified?" I wondered. "Yes," Howard nodded. "He came to me last Wednesday, said he couldn't lie under oath, confirmed all the details of the pantry incident, including the exact wording of Jessica's words. The trial was set for 3 weeks from today. During that time, Stanley tried to delay the trial, find technicalities, challenge our arguments, but the facts were against them. A week after the suit was filed, I received a call from David's mother, Dorothy Blake, an elderly woman of 78. "Russell, I'd like to meet and talk to you in person if you don't mind," she said in a shaky voice. Dorothy had arrived that evening with a bouquet of chrysanthemums from her garden. "Russell, I didn't come to stand up for Jessica," she said as we sat down to tea. "David told me how she talked to you. It's unacceptable, but he tried to stop her then, and now he's trying to find a fair solution." A fair solution has been found, I said. The house comes back to me. Maybe there could be some kind of compromise. They could pay you rent, for example. The time for compromise is over, I replied. Your daughter-in-law has chosen this path. Dorothy realized there was no changing my mind. She thanked me for listening and left upset. The trial took place a month later. A small room in the county courthouse. The atmosphere formal, strict. Judge Margaret Harris scrutinized the case file. Howard presented our case clearly and thoroughly. Stanley tried to challenge our arguments, but his objections sounded unconvincing. The key point was David's testimony. He confirmed under oath all the circumstances of the pantry incident, including the exact wording of Jessica's words. Shumashonorn. Offering an elderly person to spend the night in an unsuitable room with offensive comments is a clear breach of contract, the judge said, regardless of the parties' familial relationship. The court's decision was predictable. The contract of transfer of the house is terminated, and the property is returned to the original owner. Jessica and David had 30 days to vacate the premises. After the decision was announced, Jessica caught up with me as I was leaving the courtroom. "Daddy, wait," she shouted. "What's going to happen now? Where do we go?" "That's your problem," I replied calmly. "But we don't have any money for rent." "You have 30 days, I reminded her. "That's enough." Jessica cried real tears. "Daddy, don't you love me at all? Is one phrase more precious than your own daughter?" "I love the daughter I had before," I answered quietly. "And the one who offered me to sleep in the closet, I do not know." "But I am your daughter," she exclaimed. "A daughter would not say such word," I objected. "And if she had, she would have apologized at once." "I apologize now." "It's too late. You apologize not because you're sorry, but because you lost the trial." Jessica realized that words wouldn't help. She wiped away her tears and looked at me with an expression that was a mixture of hurt, anger, and despair. "Okay," she said quietly. "If that's what you want, that's the way it's going to be. But know that I will never come to you again. Never again. For me, you have no more daughter." "I haven't had a daughter for a long time," I replied. "I just didn't realize it." Jessica turned around and walked away. I never saw her again. A month later, I got the keys to the house. David had brought them personally without his wife. "Here," he said, holding out a bunch of keys. "The house is clean." "Where do you live now?" "We rent a small apartment on the outskirts. It's expensive, cramped. But what can we do?" "Jessica's taking it pretty badly. Blames herself and you at the same time." "Is there any chance that you two will ever get back together?" David asked from the car. "No," I answered without hesitation. "Some things are irreparable." "Shadaran, are you going to sell the house?" "Yes. It's too big for one person." "Good luck to you, Russell." "Good luck to you, David." He left and I stood in front of the house that was mine again. The fall wind rustled the yellow leaves of the maple tree I'd planted 20 years ago with little Jessica. Now the maple was big and Jessica was a stranger. I opened the door with my key and stepped inside. The house smelled of cleaning supplies and emptiness. The rooms were meticulously cleaned, but completely empty. Even my things from the boxes were gone. Apparently Jessica had thrown them away in retaliation. No matter. The house was mine, and that was enough. In a week, I'd put it on the market, buy a bigger apartment, and put the rest of the money in the bank. And as for my daughter, I guess I'll never really have her again. But that was her choice, not mine. I just exercised the rights I had thoughtfully put in the contract 3 months ago. Sometimes special clauses in documents are not so unnecessary.